can explain. Today we're going to be taking a look at Peter Pan. And I'm willing to bet that a fair chunk of you just imagined, you know, the golden-haired boy, pointy shirt, Robin Hood cap, animated by Disney, yes? Well, not quite. We're going to be looking at Peter Pan of the Child Thief by Gerald Brom, just Brom on the cover. This is the story of a Peter who is very, very adult in some ways, but also incredibly childlike in others. It's also the story of Nick, the deuteragonist, and Peter's foil. So, first order of business, what do I mean by a foil? A foil is a term used for a character who highlights the flaws and strengths of another character. I believe it comes from a jewellery making term, where you put a piece of foil underneath a stone so you reflect the light through it better. A character who is a foil for another character needn't be their exact opposite, although it's they do need stark differences. But what's much more effective is a character who embodies the old cliche of two sides of the same coin, one who's similar enough to warrant comparing, but different enough to create that contrast. So in order for Nick and Peter to be foils of one another, first they need some similarities. That's easy enough. They both have had difficult childhoods. They both hate adults. They both have some pretty significant mummy issues. And they are both outsiders in the group of the devils. Also, there's a whole lot of symbolic parallel between them. For example, when we first see them sort of together, Peter's watching Nick. Peter calls on Lady Luck for help, and about a paragraph later we see Nick stroking his lucky rabbit's foot for luck. Those parallels continue right throughout until the end when they're described in very similar terms as well. So they're the similarities you need for them to be foils, but within those similarities there are also differences. So let's go through those individually. First off, difficult childhoods. Both Peter and Nick suffered pretty badly at the hands of others during their childhood, although they both suffered differently and came out of it differently as well. Peter suffered at the hands of his parents, and then later at the hands of a group of adult villagers. And he was also raised and grew up in a forest. Nick, on the other hand, suffers at the hands of a group of teenagers. Never directly at his parents, though he does blame his mother for a lot of that. And he grew up in very urban areas. Nick only runs away from home once he's determined that he cannot stay there. Whereas Peter, it can be argued, is constantly running away from the consequences of things. The different attitudes become really obvious in the scene after they first meet where they're stealing the shoes. Nick is worried about law enforcement and getting caught, whereas Peter couldn't give less of a damn about the police. For him, running away from them is part of the fun of stealing the shoes in the first place. Punishment just doesn't seem to apply to him in his little world. Also, the hating adults thing stems pretty much from the difficult childhood thing, although again in different ways. Peter actively hates adults, whereas I would say that Nick just kind of distrusts them, much like he distrusts pretty much everyone, really. He's kind of a cynical character. Nick and Peter's mummy issues also stem from the difficult childhood thing, although because there are different environments around that, they deal with it in completely different ways. Peter, really straightforward. He hates his mother because he perceives that she has given in to the teenagers who deal drugs out of their basement, and especially because he believes that she has made no effort to protect him in the process of giving in to them. He keeps on believing that he hates her for about 2/3 of the book, until he meets the lady, and whereupon his story overlaps with Peter's. Peter's mummy issues stem much more from not having had one as a young child, and then finally meeting the lady, who's the only person who's actually cared for him in his quite short life at that point. So after she heals him, he becomes completely devoted to her, even going so far as to risk his own life and risk and sacrifice the lives of many other boys and girls in the name of helping her. Partially this is because she's put a spell on him to ensure that he remains completely devoted to her. But when he realizes that it's a spell, he doesn't really care. He doesn't make any effort to break free of that or to take her to task for it. He chooses to remain under that influence. Nick, on the other hand, when he finds out that he is under the spell, he very quickly breaks free of it once he realizes that he loves the lady more than he loves his own mother. A mother who he's maintained he has no care for whatsoever until, very close to this point. Nick's breaking free here serves two purposes within the story. The first is to highlight Nick's own difference from the devils and his how he doesn't fit into Avalon by showing that he still has a connection to the mundane world. But the second is probably more important to the topic of this discussion, and that is that if Nick were not there to break free of the spell, to show how easy it is, we would not understand how devoted Peter is to the lady even without that spell, and how dependent he is upon the lady for his own sense of self and his purpose in life. And finally, being outsiders within that group of the devils. Both boys are outsiders, but their positions are very different and they're looked at very differently by the devils. Peter is hero worshipped. He is the one constant of the group. He is their guiding star. He is very much looked up to by them, and he has to take the responsibility of being the leader of this group of children. Nick, on the other hand, he's not exactly beneath the group. He's more sort of off to the side. He's the only devil who really questions Peter. He's the only one who really wants to know more details about how the war started and what the implications were of that. And he's the only one that maintains his connection to the mundane world through his mother. Many of the devils don't really trust him. The different positions within that group of the devils, or outside it, highlight each other really. They're both very isolated figures, which allows their later closeness later in the story. And also, it allows us to contrast their different positions and interactions with the devils. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, let's go a little deeper. Let's have a look at the resolution of the story and how their characters really start to play off each other and how they affect each other's final character development. Also, this is the part that's going to contain the major spoilers, even if you've sat through the minor spoilers up till here, but still kind of want to enjoy the rest of the story untouched, this is the point where you go and read the book. So how do Nick and Peter affect one another? To start off with, Nick probably has the straightest bildungsroman story of the pair. He starts off the book nervous, unwilling to take risks, and unwilling to trust other people or get close to them. By the end of the book, he stands up to Peter, who he knows he can't take in a straight fight, in order to protect one of the devils, and then fights a demigod for Peter, a battle he is equally likely to lose, and in fact does. Nick is, at this point, described as a predator, which is a term that was only used to describe Peter beforehand, and Nick even notes to himself that he has begun to fight like the golden-eyed boy, of course referring to Peter. This, I believe, shows that Nick has taken on Peter's sense of responsibility for others and his great sense of community that kept the devils together. And he's also become slightly more willing to put himself out there for others and to trust others and to care about them. And that's your straight up bildungsroman story. Boy starts off nervous and lonerish. Boy goes on magical adventure. Boy learns to stand up for himself and something friendship. Except for one thing, which is that Nick dies before he can enact karmic revenge upon the bullies from the beginning of the story. Peter, on the other hand, doesn't so much take character points from Nick as he does finally learn to listen to what Nick is saying. Nick's outsider status among the devils, his connection to the mundane world, and his far more cynical nature allow him to see the effect Peter has on the devils much more, and to realise much quicker than any of the devils that Peter is not exactly the most stable individual. So when Nick is dying and he's giving Peter his final sort of "what the hell are you doing" speech, he finally gets Peter to listen to the fact that the devils were always following him, never the lady, and certainly not the cause of Avalon, and he accuses Peter of being the cause of the deaths of all of those boys and girls who followed him. This, coupled with the lady's rather unfortunate, in retrospect, comment about Peter staying with the boys that he's fought alongside and referring to them as their kind, allows Peter to finally break free of the lady's spell and become his own person. And so in this way, Nick and Peter's character growth are inextricably linked with each other. So before we wrap up, just one final question that I found really interesting to think about. Why did Nick need to die? Was that just for drama? Well, I never have more fun than when I'm reading too much into things, so here's my take on it. In the end of the story, Peter becomes a god in Ulfgar's place. See, it turns out he's also one of the Horned One's sons, and the Horned One is dead, so obviously they need a replacement. Now, the Horned One throughout the story is quite separate from the world. He's not as involved in things as his sisters are, which I think also probably comes from the fact that he is, according to Brom in an appendix in the back of the book, an amalgam of a whole lot of male nature deities, including the Greek Pan and Cernunnos, which, and all of them have this separateness, this ability to travel anywhere, this lack of connection to any one place or person. So in order for Nick to become a replacement for this figure, he needed to have all ties severed. The lady's tie was severed by breaking her spell, and also then by her sailing off and telling him to come and find her and rebuild Avalon when he was ready. However, if Nick had lived, there would always have been that implicit connection to the children and to the mundane world, and Nick needed to die to sever that connection. Because Nick now represented the equal and opposite connection to that of the lady. So that's my take on The Child Thief and the first episode of I Can Explain. I hope you enjoyed that, even if you haven't read the book, in which case I'm pretty sure a lot of it was gibberish. And I hope to see you next time, in which I'm going to be more than slightly presumptuous and tackle two of the big names in fantasy. As usual, in the description, find me on Twitter. As usual, links in the description, find me on Twitter, or, comment and subscribe and rate and whatever else it is that you do on YouTube. And I will post... So as usual, links in the description, find me on Twitter, comment, post, rate, describe, whatever else it happens to be that you do on YouTube. And thank you for watching.